The resolution as amended is ordered reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. The resolution will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute. Without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
Mr. Chairman,
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
pursuant to Clause 2L of Rule 11, I give notice of intent to file dissenting views.
Notice is heard. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.
And there you have it. History has been made. The House Judiciary Committee this morning voting along party lines 23 to 17 in both instances in the two articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. There was some debate in this committee about how many articles to bring. They settled on 2. 9 pages, the original document, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. David Jolly, your thoughts?
The whispers of history around this president and his presidency became a roar this morning, Nicole. A majority of the House Judiciary Committee has determined that Donald Trump as president impugned the office, impugned the nation, and in the language of the impeachment articles that were just approved, should be disqualified from holding any position of honor or trust or profit in the United States. And that roar of history will now follow Donald Trump and his presidency. No tweet can undo what just happened to Donald Trump's presidency this morning. He was caught doing wrong by the nation, doing wrong by the office that he holds, has been loaned for 4 years. And today he was held accountable for that. The full House will have a voice next week, and presuming they agree with the Judiciary Committee, we will see the President of the United States on trial in the United States Senate after the new year.
And keep in mind, Adam Schiff, who is the head of the Intelligence Committee, he has actually, as a member of the Judiciary Committee in the past, led House managers in impeaching federal judges over in the Senate. So he has a lot of experience with this. Jerry Nadler, of course, wants to take a central role, as do many of the Democrats. Like if you look at Eric Swalwell on the Judiciary Committee, Hakeem Jeffries, there's individuals who are former prosecutors and who are part of Pelosi's leadership team that want to play a starring role in this, if you will. But it's interesting because yesterday, Steve Chabot, a Republican on the committee, on the Judiciary Committee, was also on the committee in 1998 when the Judiciary panel impeached Bill Clinton and sent those articles to the Senate. Chabot said that he was selected to be an impeachment manager over in the Senate, and he said, I got to tell you, in retrospect, it's an ugly process, and I feel really sorry for whoever is picked to be a House manager because it's something that is very divisive and weighs on you, and it's very heavy, and we get caught up so much in the partisanship these days that it's hard to sort of step back and say, what's going on here? What's the ramification of this? And I think that to hear him say that caught me off guard a little bit.
Could you potentially, Molly, see, and I know that both Chairman Schiff and Chairman Nadler have constitutional law experience, but I'm thinking back to the Clinton impeachment, and the Republicans there were all white males, and I'm wondering if perhaps showing sort of a sense of diversity in the Democratic Party, that you could see somebody, for example, like Val Demings from Florida, even though she doesn't have a constitutional background. She was a former law enforcement officer. Antoine wants to jump in.
Yeah, you can say it. You can say it.
Just jump in.
I think you'll see some African American females, some African American leaders within our caucus ascend themselves as they've done through this hearing. Val Demings, Terry Sewell, Karen Bass. There are a number of African American leaders within the caucus who will essentially, likely end up being impeachment managers and watching this process. Joe Neguse from Colorado, a lot of rising stars we saw rise to the top during this process, and that's a direct reflection of the most diverse caucus in U.S. history that the Democrats have, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, and I think, Molly, I wonder, so I hear the betting game in D.C. now is, who's going to be that person to lead that impeachment trial for the Democrats. But you said something interesting. You said that a lot of people are saying that they don't want it, but then there's others who probably, because of the historic nature of this impeachment, will want to be the one.
Well, she said a lot of people want it, but there's a warning.
There's a warning, right? A warning label, right?
It may not be what it's cracked up to be.
Right, caveat emptor, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
like,
Now you got what
Senate.
you wanted. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah, now what are you going to do with
Finally
it?
caught the car.
Have fun. That's right, you caught the car.
Now what do you do?
So listen, Molly, throughout this whole process, the Republicans have complained that they haven't been able to get the witnesses that they want. And so I'm wondering just how much influence and sway do we expect the Democrats to have when it comes to the Senate trial and witnesses?
Well, see, and that's the big question. I mean, it all kind of comes down to what Mitch McConnell and the White House attorneys figure out they can accomplish over in terms of the process for a Senate trial. Because remember, you need to have 51 votes to move ahead with creating this process that we will see unfold over in the Senate. And there are a number of Republicans who were going into this before the impeachment vote were uncomfortable with what the president said, what was done. They've also been very uncomfortable with how the House Democrats have handled it, and I say Democrats because they're in charge of the House, and the rights that they've given to Republicans over in the House to call witnesses. So right now it's a bit unclear. And here's Jerry Nadler.
Molly, I'm going to cut right. Oh, there you go. She
Nice
did it
job.
for us. Very nice.
You don't need us.
Okay. Today is a solemn and sad day. For the third time in a little over a century and a half, the House Judiciary Committee has voted articles of impeachment against the President for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The House will act expeditiously. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, are you disappointed there was no obstruction of justice? So why would you take
Okay, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee not taking any questions at all, short and sweet. But I think he's a little bit. I mean, he has taken questions before for a number of things, but I think it speaks to how he presented today's vote, how serious it really is. And yeah, sometimes we can be sort of lighthearted about this conversation, but the truth of the matter is that it is historic. It is very serious. And as we move forward, we are essentially sort of reinterpreting or interpreting the Constitution, right? So what are we going to allow presidents to get away with? How do you define abuse of power? It's ill-defined right now, and we're adding to this definition as we move forward.
Right, and I feel like our job as journalists is to try and clarify to our viewers and to the American people what this really means and what it will mean for not only what it means for the President of the United States, but what it means for the future of this republic.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why we want to bring in our experts and talk to our reporters who can sort of help people understand what is happening. Because I get it. There are a lot of people who say, look, this has been hours and hours and hours and months and months and months of the same stuff we keep hearing. Yes, he did it. No, he didn't. Yes, this was a perfect call. No, this wasn't a perfect call. And I can understand how people's eyes glaze over. But my sense is that, as we move forward in this process, it's going to be more important and incumbent upon all of us to try and clarify to our viewers what is actually happening and how this will affect their lives and the lives of their children, because that's really what we're talking about.
And that's why it's very concerning when we say, the outcome of the Senate trial is a foregone conclusion. Right? We shouldn't be able to say that. The role of the Congress and the role of the Senate is to make sure that the president is doing what he's supposed to do, that the president is fulfilling his role and not violating the Constitution. Sorry, Leslie, I think that's you, right?
Yeah,
okay,
yes. Anne-Marie, in spirit, I'd love to think this is a civics class and we're learning the proper way to go about impeachment. We're all very nebulous and we're very, what's the definition? And I was here on the Hill, in 98 when the Clinton impeachment happened. And the big thing we keep forgetting to say is there was a third-party entity, a Department of Justice, special counsel that came forward with boxes and boxes of information, just like the IG report that we just heard about abuse of the FISA courts that caused America to pause, that caused Republicans and Democrats to come together and say, wait a minute, this is somebody who spent 2 years investigating this, and we have to listen to the merits of that argument. Were there obstruction, where there wasn't? That was done with Robert Mueller. And Senator Lindsey Graham talked about that. Had Mueller come forward and said something in this case, this would be a different conversation. But it wasn't. This entire process is so partisan. And I'm not the first one to come forward and say, oh, and look at it that way with this kind of not giving a fair balance. I try to listen, like a lot of us, to both sides. But when it's so hyper-partisan, and you talk about cherry picking of the witnesses, not allowing for a minority hearing, 100,000 documents and pages presented to the courts, but not really included. As much as you may dislike Republicans and dislike this president, you can't look at this process and say it's fair. Which is why when we transfer to the Senate, you're looking at Republican senators as the cooling process. Molly talks about that all the time. Molly Hooper, that's going to say, wait a minute, it's not legitimate, so we're not going to give it that legitimacy. And that's the difference. I want us to take away why it's so different from Clinton and why it was different from Nixon, and it is this environment that we're in.
Leslie, another thing that's different, if I recall, and Molly would probably know better than me, is I don't think you had the Senate working with the president's lawyers as they move forward towards a trial. I mean, we talk about, sort of not wanting this to be a partisan process, but that's pretty concerning, Leslie.
Well, I'm going to let Marley.
Well, what I was going to say is actually no. The Senate did work with the White House attorneys because they knew how serious this was to establish a process that was fair to both parties. In fact, the Democrats and Republicans one day in early January 1999 got together in a closed-door session all day to hash out what are going to be the rules for this upcoming Senate trial. And both sides, the defense and the Republicans, they both had 3 days to put on their cases, and the biggest issue that both parties had was which witnesses do we call? And actually, when a number of Republicans wanted to call Monica Lewinsky to come appear before the Senate, they did agree to have her give a deposition behind closed doors, which was then played on the floor. But the whole Senate, 70-30, voted against calling Monica Lewinsky. At that time, the central figure in that impeachment trial, they voted against calling her up to appear before them in person. And really, Republicans and Democrats worked together pretty well during that period, and Republicans were in the majority in the Senate, and Bill Clinton was in the White House, a Democrat.